Thank you, everybody. And I, in particular, want to thank Melanie Stansberry, Representative Melanie Stansberry, for her remarks about the big picture of what we need to do. Mike Hammond for his leadership. I cannot think of a better person to be the governor's senior water advisor, and Paula Garcia, who has substantial wisdom and understanding about what we need to do in the future. Melanie said we need to think long and think short. The water advocates are trying to do both, and we ask you to participate and help us in our short-term and long-term thinking. I want to thank you, our conference participants, for spending your Saturday morning with us. We also hope you'll join the 4 breakout sessions next week and the week after, where we delve more deeply into these strategic actions, the 4 strategic actions that the water advocates are advocating, and determine how we might act to get the 2022 legislature and the 2023 legislature to begin our required adaptation process. Just a reminder that this is truly a climate emergency. Surviving New Mexico's arid future requires us both to mitigate carbon emissions and, importantly, to adapt to warming and drying. New Mexico is the most arid of the 50 states. New Mexico's average annual water supplies will decrease by 25 to 35% within 50 years by the year 2070. Mitigation of greenhouse gases has begun, but New Mexico has not yet begun to adapt to our more arid future. Adaptation is essential. New Mexico must adjust to a future with significantly less water. We must face the facts. Throughout New Mexico, current water uses cannot be sustained. Our future needs for water will increase as climate change substantially reduces our water supplies and dries our soils and watersheds. New Mexicans need to decide what they want New Mexico and its diverse regions to look like. We then must make changes to equitably allocate our declining regional supplies accordingly. I'm a real fan of David Gutzler. You may know his name. He's an eminent, now retired UNM water scientist, and he is a member of the International Climate Change Panel. I listened to him in 2019 implore the legislature to plan for much less water. He told them it is better to plan than to be thrown under the bus. But here we are in 2022 with no state adaptation actions taken to date. The stakes are huge. Our diverse cultures, our people and economy, food production, and our riverine and riparian ecosystems are at stake. The governor and the legislature have not yet recognized or provided resources to initiate New Mexico's water adaptation. House Speaker Brian Egolf recently sponsored a climate change conference. It did not address water. Senate President Pro Tem Mimi Stewart, speaking at that climate change conference, said the legislature is often the last to address publicly recognized problems. Water adaptation is a case in point. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham released an excellent water policy platform in the closing days of her election campaign, but she's not paid public attention to her water platform and has not treated New Mexico's grievous water issues as her priorities. New Mexico residents must respectfully demand that the governor and the legislature begin our adaptation to living with much less water. My two strategic action topics are intertwined. Funding our water agencies is essential, our agencies and our water programs, and water governance reform is also essential. Increased capacity and reform are both essential if we are to adapt rather than merely react to the hotter and drier years ahead. Funding alone, though, will not succeed unless we also reform New Mexico's water statutes, policies, and governance. We have a short session of the legislature coming up. We need to secure funding in the 2022 legislature. We also, over the 2022 interim, must collaborate to prepare bills for consideration by the 2023 legislature to begin reform of New Mexico's water laws, policy, and governance. Grassroots lobbying is required for both. The Office of the State Engineer and the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission are caught in a vicious cycle. Because they are crippled, their work fails to proactively face the state's urgent needs. Because they're not getting the job done, and because both our governor and the legislature have turned their backs on New Mexico's serious water supply problems, our water agencies are denied staff and funding. That's the vicious cycle. A public observer of the budget, the state budget, without knowledge of the actual water supply facts and projections in New Mexico would wrongly conclude New Mexico, the most arid of the 50 states, doesn't have a water problem. But we certainly do. What does Fund New Mexico's Water Future mean in 2022? It means that the legislature and the governor must provide for substantial expansion of the agency's professional staff numbers and operating budgets. It also means substantial one-time capital appropriations. I will explain. The background is that the two agency staff numbers and budgets were slashed to the bone during the Martinez administration. The staff and budgets have not been restored. Retirements of senior staff and resignations have caused a serious loss of knowledge, a very real brain drain. The state engineer submitted a budget expansion request to the governor's office, as he must do every year, in August of last year. I'm told it was initially favorably received. But in the end, the state engineer was again directed, in these times of substantial state revenue, federal funding, for the third time, he was directed for the third time to submit a flat budget with no increases. The water advocates have prepared a detailed budget request. We need to lobby legislators and the governor to fund them, to fund New Mexico's water future. We will post the details on our website where they'll be available for your review. But today I want to briefly explain the four big components of the water advocates budget request. The first is to fully fund the state engineer's August 2021 budget expansion request, which called for 39 new positions, $5.3 million for staff and contracts, and he also included $14.2 million for lower Rio Grande litigation and for levies in the middle Rio Grande and a few other minor capital needs. We shouldn't look beyond or try to second guess what the state engineer, who has resigned because he was directed to submit a flat budget, is thinking behind these. These need to be, his request needs to be funded. But there were many things that I think are crucially important that were missing from the state engineer's budget expansion request for the next fiscal year. The water advocates have prepared an augmentation request, a budget augmentation request. Its purposes are to be able to hire professional staff at competitive rates, and for the Office of the State Engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission to equip them to be productive. It's my opinion that the state engineer's budget expansion request does not include sufficient funds to hire qualified, experienced staff. We also need the state engineer to promulgate rules for priority administration and initiate facilitated collaborative shortage sharing discussions in the Middle Rio Grande. The Interstate Stream Commission needs funding to initiate regional water planning with scientific integrity for improved resilience. The agencies both need to implement the Water Data Act, and they can't do that with existing staff and resources. And last, we need to initiate a program of water resources investigations and data collection and rebuild the Hydrology Bureau of the State Engineer, which has been decimated by retirements and resignations. We no longer have a modeler, a person capable of doing sophisticated water resources modeling employed by these agencies. The Water Advocates budget request includes 15 new positions, $18.6 million for staff, grants, and contracts, grants for planning, and a 4-year capital appropriation to upgrade the agency's obsolete information technology. That would be a $10 million 4-year capital appropriation request. So those together are what we need for the agencies to be able to rebuild themselves and become capable of meeting the challenges that we face and helping New Mexicans in all regions plan for a future with less water. Additionally, there are 2 large pieces that need to be funded. The Interstate Stream Commission administers 2 infrastructure trust funds that were established in the late 1800s when New Mexico was trying to become a state. These 2 trust funds, called the Irrigation Works Construction Fund and the Improvement of the Rio Grande Income Fund, are dedicated by law for infrastructure and for things like major channel maintenance in the Rio Grande. And without the channel maintenance, we simply can't meet the requirements of the Rio Grande Compact for delivery of water that users below Elephant Butte Dam are entitled to receive. These 2 trust funds, since the beginning of the Martinez administration, have been used to fund routine Office of the State Engineer and Interstate Stream Commission staff and annual operations. That's not allowed by law. Approximately $12 million a year has been spent annually for these wrongful operations and routine annual expenditures. That $100,000 needs to be refunded to the trust funds so it can be used for the established purpose of the trust funds, to pay for infrastructure and crucial state programs associated with the Rio Grande. So $100 million to rebuild the trust funds and replace the balances that have been taken from them for wrongful purposes. Mike Hammond mentioned this, and these are his ideas, but we also need a very substantial amount of money for statewide drought relief and for compensated rotational fallowing in the middle Rio Grande to meet the Rio Grande Compact requirements and not violate the compact as we deliver water. People have asked me what is wrong with violating the compact. And I have 2 parts of that answer. How would we feel if Colorado didn't meet their delivery obligations to us? That's one big reason. And the second reason is that Texas will sue us. They've already submitted a complaint that involves the Middle Rio Grande to the United States Supreme Court. If we violate the explicit conditions of the compact, we will lose control. The issues will go silent because they're going to be in litigation. Nobody's going to want to talk about them. And in the end, we lose control that we now have. So we have to pivot and comply with our compact obligations to share water. Basically, the compact is an interstate water sharing agreement, both in times of surplus and in shortage. So We believe that $65 million is needed from federal stimulus funds, $50 million to fund the statewide drought relief, and $15 million for compensated rotational fallowing of farmlands in the Middle Rio Grande. I've been asked why rotational fallowing, and the short answer is because New Mexico is not capable of administering water to deliver more water. Well, instead, the only choice we have for the next couple of years to avoid a compact violation is a very significant amount of fallowing in the Middle Rio Grande. So those are the budget requests. And again, a detailed narrative and tabulation of these budget requests will be posted on the Water Advocates website before Monday. I'm now going to talk briefly about the next need, which is water governance reform. We need to begin in earnest over 2022 to prepare several bills for the consideration of the 2023 legislature. Reform of our water laws, policies, and governance must, by its nature, be incremental, but we need to start. But Water Advocates will be working collaboratively with others to draft 3 bills. The first would reorganize the Office of the State Engineer and the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission as divisions of a new cabinet-level New Mexico Water Resources Department. We need to establish criteria, structure, and authorities for effective and integrated community and regional water planning. And we need to create a very substantially funded Water Resilience Implementation Fund for the purposes of providing funding for projects that will allow us to adapt and increase our resilience. I'll talk about the details, or I'll summarize the details for each. As Representative Stanberry said, our current agencies are not well adapted to the current moment. We need a new cabinet-level Water Resources Department. Reorganization is necessary because of poor ingrained business practices, insular thinking, and priorities of the existing agencies that need to be shaken up and reoriented. There are many examples of neglect, poor business practices, and insular thinking. The fact that the water rights records of the state engineer's Roswell district office still exist only as paper files and cards in card cabinets is one of these examples. We need new ways of thinking and much better integration of the various aspects of water governance. The Water Advocates propose that the Office of the State Engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission be reorganized as operating divisions of a new New Mexico Water Resources Department. New Mexico Water deserves a cabinet-level department, and I'd note that the state engineer is not a cabinet-level government official. Rather than continue to rely on a professional engineer to be New Mexico's top water executive, the Water Resources Department would be headed by a qualified cabinet secretary that need not be a licensed engineer. The lack of depth in the existing agencies is very apparent. The reorganization should create more depth and more leaders to lead the state's water management functions. The new department would include a team of experienced professionals to lead and manage the operating divisions. The state engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission would be operating divisions of the Water Resources Department. The state engineer would oversee the Water Regulatory Division and would manage the functions such as dam safety that require a professional engineer. The Interstate Stream Commission would oversee policy development, implementation of integrated water resources management and planning, and most important, would provide active support of collaborative planning by regions to develop adaptation and shortage sharing plans. This includes development of the shortage sharing plans that the state engineer's general rules for administration would accept as an alternative to strict priority administration, which frankly would be very difficult and would create very, very adverse results. 3 new operating divisions would be created, each managed by an experienced water professional with expertise in their respective division's business. Adjudications have been neglected in New Mexico. When I was Interstate Stream Commission Director in 1997, the United States of America sued all sorts of parties claiming total ownership of all the water in the lower Rio Grande. State Engineer Tom Turney at the time was able to get the federal government to hold that litigation in abeyance, pending, and he said if they would do that, he would begin and complete an adjudication of the water rights in the lower Rio Grande. Well, that was 1997, and in 2002, the adjudication is nowhere near complete. The adjudication division would be charged with coming up with ideas to reform the process, with settlement of tribal and Pueblo water rights or adjudication of those rights, and completion of adjudications across the state. We certainly need better business practices and a focused attention to completing the work to determine who has property rights in the ownership of water rights. That's essential for everything that lies ahead. A new hydrology division would be staffed by scientists and would be responsible for providing independent science-based opinions and reports. This division would work with the United States Geological Survey and the New Mexico Bureau of Geology to conduct water resources investigations, manage the routine collection of data, and prepare models that are necessary for evidence-based regional water planning. A data division would focus on implementation of the Water Data Act and make data and compilations publicly accessible, reliable, and meaningful. We have severe data quality problems in data that are maintained in particular by the Office of the State Engineer, and they're still on paper. There's no way to access many of those records unless you actually can see the paper, and then it's impossible to get an integrated view. Reviewers of the organizational chart that I drafted and have circulated suggested that the Water Resources Department should also include the Environment Department's Water Quality Protection Division. If done, this would integrate the management of water quantity and water quality. That integration is sorely needed. If the Water Quality Protection Division were to become a part of the Water Resources Department, that would create 2 additional divisions. The Water Quality Protection Division, much as it exists in the Environment Department today, and a new Projects Implementation Division of the New Mexico Water Resources Department. The Project Implementation Division would combine all of the resources, and it needs to be substantially augmented to provide support to proponents of projects identified and justified in regional water plans to improve water resilience, and would oversee grants in the implementation of state-funded water projects. Importantly, the Projects Implementation Division would help project proponents get projects to the shovel-ready stage. In many areas of New Mexico, it's very difficult for the small communities to get projects ready for bidding. I don't propose that the Projects Implementation Division would do the engineering, but rather that they would have resources that would ensure that engineers with fiduciary responsibility to their clients would help get those projects ready to construct. The water quality protection programs, if they were transferred to the new Water Resources Department, would assure that water quantity and water quality are regulated and managed jointly, and would be a big part in the reform of regional water planning. Let's now talk about regional water planning. The Legislative Finance Committee staff are very powerful, and their leaders decry the lack of productivity of the water planning efforts of the past. They criticize the plans as shelf reports that are never implemented. That is true, partly because shelf reports are exactly what the 1987 regional water planning statutes call for. The existing legislation does not consider the need for plans to be approved, and if approved, to be implemented. The existing legislation merely requests regional reports showing a need within New Mexico for all of New Mexico's water. That legislation was motivated by El Paso's attempt in the 1980s to appropriate lower Rio Grande groundwater in New Mexico that had not then been declared by the state engineer to be subject to his jurisdiction. So the water planning statutes that we have on the books today are a reaction to keep New Mexico's water within New Mexico water and to defend it from Texas. The 1987 statutes need to be updated to establish expectations that regional water plans funded by the state must meet. It's important that if the state funds these plans, that the state receive value for the public monies that are spent to prepare them. The new law needs to establish the respective responsibilities and authorities for regional water planning and set criteria for the approval of completed plans. Approval itself must mean that, if approved, state government is committing to materially support the implementation of the approved plans. The third piece of legislation that we need to prepare is to establish a water resilience implementation fund that the water advocates propose be funded at the level of $1 billion. For context, I note that the 2018 state water plan produced by the Interstate Stream Commission lists $4 billion in unapproved, unprioritized projects. The proposed $1 billion Water Resources Implementation Fund would serve two purposes. The existence of the fund would provide strong motivation to create action-oriented regional water resilience improvement plans. We need that incentive because previous rounds of regional water planning have resulted in very little value and no projects, even though the people who prepared the plans spent substantial effort to produce them. Another aspect of this fund is that very substantial state federal funding is available for climate change adaptation. New Mexico Water Agency staff should aggressively seek this federal funding. The Water Resilience Implementation Fund would be used to match federal funding to implement projects developed and justified by approved regional water planning plans. New Mexico faces a difficult, more arid future. We need to face our hydrologic realities by reserving funding to help communities across the state become more resilient to the water supply deprivations that have begun to occur and that the future will bring. The Leap Ahead analysis forecasts annual water supply decreasing by 25 to 35% throughout New Mexico by 2070. New Mexico needs this fund to help finance New Mexico's adaptation and to secure the substantial federal matching funding that will be available upon the completion of good plans. So funding is needed in 2022. We need to lobby for that, and we need to begin to change to adapt to a more arid future by passing the 3 laws that I have explained just now. I'm happy now to stop and yield to the panel for discussion.